Mr. Jones, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
As I mentioned earlier, the debate this morning has, I believe, come to a very high level of and is worthy of the honor of this floor. And I rise in agreement with the authors of the bill and the proponents of the bill that it is well written and well constructed. And I wish that all the legislation that we pass off this floor was as well constructed, well written, and well debated as this bill. Unfortunately, I believe that some issues transcend well-written law and words on paper. And I believe that this is one of those issues. We've had several speakers on both sides of this issue share very compelling reasons why they are supporting it or not supporting it. Our colleague from Santa Barbara gave a very compelling reason for not supporting it. Is it the duty of us, is it the duty of the state to ratify these decisions? We've had speakers opposed to the bill talk about it being historic. And ladies and gentlemen, this is an historic bill. And I would ask that you have that perspective as you're deciding which button to push. I know many of us came on the floor this morning fully aware of the decision we were going to make, yes or no. Some of us came onto the floor still undecided and maybe still be undecided. And you're just waiting for that last moment to push the red button or the green button. There's been speakers talk about a slippery slope and what's happening in other states and in other countries. Mr. Speaker, permission to read.
Without objection.
Aaron Curate,
MD, Associate Professor of Psychiatry and Director, Program in Medical Ethics at UC Irvine School of Medicine, states, if there exists a right to assisted suicide, why would it be restricted only to those in the throes of terminal illness? What about the elderly person suffering a slow but non-terminal decline? What about the adolescent or young adult in the throes of depression, demoralization, or despair? Once we adopt the principle that suicide is acceptable, then the fences that legislators might try to erect around it, having 6 months to live or having mental capacity, for example, are inevitably arbitrary fences. He goes on to say these restrictions will eventually be abandoned as the situation with assisted suicide in Belgium and the Netherlands demonstrates. To cite just a few examples, in Belgium, assisted suicide has been granted to a man with untreatable depression and to a prisoner suffering psychological anguish due to his imprisonment. In the Netherlands, assisted suicide has been granted to a woman because she did not want to live in a nursing home. He continues, we see evidence here not only of a practical slippery slope, that restrictions will be difficult to enforce or monitor. More than this, we see a relentlessly logical slippery slope. Because once we accept the principle, the restrictions are arbitrary. The expansion of assisted suicide thus moves inexorably from a cancer patient with 6 months to live to individuals who are merely dejected, depressed, or desperate, end quote. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a historic bill. And I would ask for all of you for just a moment, if you would please, to focus on the words above the speaker's rostrum.
30 seconds.
Legislatorum est justus legis candiere. It is the duty of the legislature to pass just laws. It's our duty, members, to pass just laws. If this goes to a referendum or to a ballot measure, then it goes to a ballot measure. But by voting no today, we uphold our duty of passing just laws. And in my close, if I can just speak for a moment to those that are still wavering and undecided.
Time, Mr. Jones.
I want you to have the perspective of 30 years from now. Will you be the one that starts us on this slippery slope? I ask for a no vote.
Mr. Cooley, from your desk.
Colleagues, this is assuredly a very difficult issue, and I have certainly struggled with it for quite a while. And I think on behalf of the institution, I hear the argument that it may go to the ballot or may not. For months, I have sort of felt that this issue is a referenda on technology. Even as my colleague from San Diego, Oceanside, remarked, the technology of medicine has changed. So this is really a referenda to me of, as it has changed people's prospects at death. It has changed the way people feel how it may get drawn out. It has changed how people fear the consequences of it being prolonged. So I see this bill in itself as a form of intervention for the legislature to look at the medical system and how it operates and consider, is there a measured way for the legislature to do something? The bill has been amended with a 10-year sunset, which, unlike a ballot proposition, assures us that there will be some ascertainment of how this measure has unfolded in the state of California, some metrics, some assessment of its unfolding, so that a future generation of lawmakers, not mine, will have occasion to kind of revisit those issues. It is, as I say, assuredly a difficult issue. But I look at it through the lens of my own faith. You know, I hear the Apostle Paul saying, for me to live is Christ, to die is gain. The writer of Hebrews saying, run with perseverance the race that is set before you. Paul telling Timothy, I have run the race. You know, a lot of life is about people getting to the point of having run the race well, however they ascertain this. And I have been with people who are dying and felt that the most important gift I had to give them was the word that it was okay, that they had run the race well, that a moment comes and they can look past the present moment. Did this with my mom, done it with other folks. I'm struck that I barely knew my grandfather, but I know he died hard because my dad always talked about that. The circumstances of my grandfather's deaths in the late 1950s is not that we have today. So I would say this is about, as people find themselves on the receiving end of technology, having some resort to technology to give them a choice. So it's not just one-sided. Persons in the medical system are subject to care. I actually am not going to quote a poem. I have a poem by a favorite poet, a psalm on crossing the river, that says basically, if I'm crossing the river, don't try to drag me back. This is by an author who sees beyond the river is life. So don't try to pull me back where you don't really have life here. There's a better life beyond. So this is a very, very hard issue. And some of you may know I've been dealing with health issues affecting my own loved ones recently, not of this character, but heavy. But But anyway, I think it is appropriate for this body to look at how the medical system works, to recognize that there is technology on both sides of this question. It's what is available to people. Are people feeling driven by technology, or is there technology in their pocket? If they decide they have run the race.
30 seconds, Mr. Cooley.
Ultimately, I'm not sure I'd be standing up in support of this bill, but for that 10-year sunset, I believe it lets this body, which should be focused on just laws, maintaining control of this debate, not those of my class, a different class, but a different body, rather than letting this sort of dialogue get away from us in the state of California.
All debate having ceased, Dr. Eggman, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And thank you to everyone who spoke. I respect each and every one of yours opinion, position, and I know nobody takes this lightly. I certainly don't take this lightly. People know something of my background. I have been someone who has devoted my life to healthcare. As a 18-year-old, I joined the military as a combat medic. I served my country in hospitals in dealing with sick and wounded people. When I got out and I decided I wanted to stay in hospitals, but I wanted to do it from a perspective of working with people's emotions and their families. And I have worked in and around healthcare for the rest of my time as a social worker. People know that I have worked as a hospice social worker. I have sat with hundreds, perhaps thousands of families as they have taken these last steps in this sacred journey of death. And my friends, it is a sacred journey that we take with our families, with our own perspective, with our own thoughts about death. I feel blessed to have sat at the bedside with so many, to witness their struggle, their reconciliations, their peace. And I can tell you that almost without question, people want to know at the end that their life has meant something. They want to look back and know that it counted. And for the most part, they want to die on their own terms. And sometimes that is hanging on to the bitter, bitter end in any way imaginable. And I have sat with families and prayed for their miracle. And I've also helped them plan if that miracle didn't happen. You've heard me say, in my 20s, 4 months and at her bedside, I cared for my godmother as she died. In my 30s, 4 months, years, she lived with me. I cared for my grandmother and was at her bedside when she died. In my 40s, after a decade of caring for my mother, I was at her bedside when she died. And remember, since we have been on this floor together, I cared for my sister-in-law as she died a violent death of cancer. And as you know, I became a subsequent parent from that death. And then 3 months later, my brother and sister and I sat at my father's bedside as he drew his last breath. And we toasted him with some wild turkey. I don't come at this lightly. I did my PhD in the state of Oregon. In 1997, I began when the end-of-life options came into effect there. I did my dissertation on end-of-life decision-makings for Latino families. Not in Oregon, in California. I came back with my mother. As she was dying, she served as my research assistant. I wanted to make it as culturally appropriate as possible. And we traveled up and down this valley and met with families after they'd lost someone and talked to them about their process and about their intersection with the healthcare system, the clashes they'd had, and ways that we can make that better. I did my doctoral research internship at the Center for End-of-Life Decision-Making in Oregon. I don't come at this lightly. I spent a decade in academia teaching graduate students about end-of-life and how we do it respectfully. I don't come at this lightly. I agree we need to improve healthcare and healthcare outcomes. I am committed to doing that. If I am lucky enough to have a decade in this House, I will continue to work on that. I am committed to having a select committee on end-of-life care. We put in a 10-year sunset on this. There is an annual report due from Public Health to see how we're doing, how it's coming along. I will hold a legislative hearing every year so that we can review what's going on and make adjustments if we need to. I am committed to this issue of people being able to die on their own terms. Everybody in here who talked about their own experience of death, that is good, that is yours. Keep it, hold it, pray for the miracle. Other people want a different option. We all heard from Brittany Maynard's husband, a young woman who was desperate to live, who tried everything to maintain her life. And when it was time, when she knew there was no more hope, she had the resources and the privilege to move to Oregon to be able to take this. And in her final moments, she took it, she gathered her family around, and within 5 minutes, she died a gentle death. In our first press conference, Jennifer Glass came and spoke. Her words stayed with me, her face stayed with me when she said, I have done everything to live. Please don't make me die on your terms. Let me die on my terms. She did chemo, she did Reiki, she did radiation, everything she could possibly do. But she did not want to die that last ugly death as she knew hers would be because of the type of her cancer. She died in exactly the way she feared a week before we reintroduced this bill. Exactly the way she feared. She had to go into terminal sedation. For a week, she starved to death and she died of dehydration. She woke up at least 2 times in a panic with her family sitting, watching. She drowned in her own fluids. Exactly the way she didn't want to die. Christy O'Donnell came. Twice she's come, 3 times she's come to testify. She identifies herself as a Republican, as a Christian. She spent over a decade in the Los Angeles Police Department, and then she decided she wanted to become an attorney. With her young daughter, as a single mother, her daughter sitting under her desk as she got her law degree, and she fought to defend our laws. She has done everything she can to live, and now she realizes she will die. The last gift she wants to give her 21-year-old daughter is to have her have a peaceful death, to have her daughter and her family gathered around her. She can take this medication and she can peacefully go away. She does not want the last thoughts that her 21-year-old daughter that she has spent her whole life protecting, being proud of, developing a relationship with. That mother wants that control in that last minute to say, this is the memory I want for my baby, for my little girl. Why would we want to take that from her? We've heard a lot of talk about the special session. It's not the time. She's waiting, members. Other people are waiting for us to be able to act. Do we still need to work on health care? Yes, we do. But do we have an opportunity today to provide a choice, a compassionate choice to Californians who are dying? In the process, people are watching. I can't tell you how many stories, how many people have reached out to me on this bill. I can't tell you the amount of people who have reached out to me and said, thank you. I showed up to work one day and a man was dead in the lobby having shot his head off because he didn't want to do it at home where his family would find him because he was dying and he didn't have any other options. We are all, hopefully, members in control of our own destiny. We are all going to die. As we look back at that trail, at the footsteps that we've left on that path, some people, members, want to be in control when their footstep makes the last mark. I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, Dr. Eggman. With that, the clerk will open the roll. All members vote or desire to vote. All members vote or desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. The clerk will close the roll, tally the vote. Ayes 42, noes 33. Measure passes. There's no applause on the floor, members. Please maintain decorum. Members, an announcement. This House will stand in recess for 2 hours. There will be a Democratic as well as a Republican caucus, which will respectively meet for an hour. Then the following committees will meet: Governmental Organization in room 4202, Health Committee in room 437, and the Rules Committee will be meeting upon adjournment of caucus. This House stands in recess. Members, session will reconvene at 2:20. Session will reconvene at 2:20.
Senate is also moving over an assembly bill that was amended in the Senate for our concurrence, also a procedural move to have bills ready for any negotiated agreement. So in order to have a successful special session, we need to take this procedural step, and I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, Mr. Bonta. Seeing no discussion or debate on the item, the clerk will open the roll. All members vote or desire to vote. All members vote or desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. The clerk will close the roll. Tally the vote. Ayes 43, no 0. Measure passes. The second extraordinary session is recessed under call of the Speaker. Members, we are back in the regular session. Mr. Holden, you are recognized for your procedural motions in the regular session.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request unanimous consent to suspend Assembly Rule 45.5 and allow Assemblymember Gray to speak on adjourned in memory today.
Without objection, that request is granted.
At the request of the author, please send the following bill to the inactive file, File Item 74, Senate Bill 175, Huff.
The clerk will note.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Members, we are back in the regular session on the concurrence file. We are going to begin with File Item File item number 10, that's AB 71. The clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 71 by Assemblymember Rodriguez, an act relating to criminal justice.
Mr. Rodriguez, you may open.
Speaker and members, Senate amendments are technical in nature and better identify the data to be collected. I respectfully ask your aye vote on concurrence.
Thank you, Mr. Rodriguez. Seeing no discussion or debate on the item, clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Clerk will close the roll. Tally the vote. Ayes 66. Noes 1. Senate amendments are concurred in. File item 11, AB 74. Clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 74 by Assemblymember Calderon and others, an act relating to care facilities.
Mr. Calderon, you may open.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. AB 74 is back on concurrence. Amendments taken in the Senate reduced implementation costs of unannounced inspections in community care facilities by 2019. Thank you, and I respectfully ask for your aye vote in concurrence.
Thank you, Mr. Calderon. Seeing no discussion or debate on the item, clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. The clerk will close the roll. Tally the vote. Ayes 69. No 0. Senate amendments are concurred in. File item number 12, AB 101. Clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 101 by Assemblymember Alejo and others, an act relating to people instruction.
Mr. Alejo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I rise today to present AB 101, which is back on concurrence. Simple amendments were made in the Senate Appropriations Committee to reduce cost. AB 101 establishes the Ethnic Studies Advisory Committee to make recommendations to the state superintendent regarding the development of an ethnic studies model curriculum. This model curriculum will ensure that quality courses in ethnic studies are made available to high schools throughout the state. And it has been observed that ethnic studies encourages students to become academically engaged, increase their outcomes on academic tests, improve graduation rates, and helps develop a sense of self-efficacy and personal empowerment. California has one of the largest and most diverse student populations in the nation, with ethnic minorities accounting for over 71% of the student population. This bill recognizes the diverse makeup of our state and better prepares California's youth to be college-ready and career-ready in a global economy. For these reasons, I respectfully ask for aye vote on this important bill.
Thank you, Mr. Alejo. Seeing no discussion on the item, clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Clerk will close the roll. Tally the vote. Ayes 55, noes 12. Senate amendments are concurred in. File item number 13, that's AB 193. Clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 193 by Assemblymember Mainshine and others, an act relating to conservatorships.
Mr. Mainshine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. AB 193 is back on concurrence. This bill would serve to get individuals with severe mental illnesses that are overlooked by current law the help and treatment they need through an LPS conservatorship. I respectfully request an aye vote.
Thank you, sir. With that, the clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Clerk will close the roll. Tally the vote. Ayes 72, no 0. Senate amendments are concurred in. File item 14 is AB 224. Clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 224 by Assemblymember Jones Sawyer, an act relating to pupils.
Mr. Jones Sawyer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. AB 224 is back on concurrence. AB 224 requires the State Department of Education, in consultation with the California Foster Youth Education Task Force, to develop a standardized notice of the education rights of foster children and to post a notice on its internet website. The amendments taken in the Senate were due to chaptering out issues with several other measures. Thank you, and I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, Mr. Jones Sawyer. Seeing no discussion or debate on the item, clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Clerk will close the roll. Tally the vote. Ayes 71, no 0. Senate amendments are concurred in. File item 15, AB 305. Clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 305 by Assemblymember Gonzalez and others, an act relating to employment.
Ms. Gonzalez, you may open.
Mr. Speaker, members, AB 305, a bill to eliminate gender bias in workers' compensation, is back for concurrence. An amendment made in the Senate slightly narrows the bill, and I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, Ms. Gonzalez. Seeing no discussion or debate on the item, the clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Clerk will close the roll. Tally the vote. Ayes 53, noes 16. Senate amendments are concurred in. File item 16 is passed and retained.